time preference as an essential requisite for action, and it's going to be awesome. So you should come. If you don't want to read it, don't. Just show up.
And so today we're going to be talking about social libertarianism. I actually really don't like it when people say that we're socially liberal, because I think that leftists are social libertarian and that right-wingers are fiscally, or they claim to be fiscally conservative, fiscally libertarian. Because we're the only consistent ideology, in my opinion. And we're going to explain why that's true.
Best out of both.
So. Yes, exactly.
Yeah. But sister issues though.
And that's because we have a non-aggression principle.
Yeah, non-aggression principle. Basically what that is that everyone should be allowed to do whatever they please as long as they're not harming anyone, and as long as they respect that right with someone else, then it's all cool, all dandy. And so that's basically non-aggression principle. That's like building block of...
That's like the foundation of all libertarian thought, basically. All libertarian ideas are based on the idea that if someone's not harming you, you really have no right to prevent them from doing whatever they're doing. So yeah, I mean, it's like the simplest ideology to explain.
Yeah. I mean, and as I said, at any point, if y'all have anything to say, just...
Because we don't want this to be like a lecture.
Yeah, don't want to be like a lecture, right? That's why there are all questions.
Yeah. So people normally say, what about the roads? I find that annoying. And a little bit weird. So when we're talking about spontaneous order, my favorite example is the internet, basically, because the internet kind of just emerges, and like Wikipedia, you can look up almost anything nowadays, and there's information online. And it's not because the government told people to do it. They're not really efficient at that. If you've ever looked at a government website, they're usually, like, they just started having government websites a few years ago. Like, they barely understand what the internet is. Now they're trying to regulate it now that they know it exists.
And another aspect or like thing that came through spontaneous order, I think, is very interesting. Is like about how, you know, like how language came about. Like that's a good way to see it, you know, because it's just like people together, and eventually they just started communicating, finding a way. And so, boom, spontaneous order, like it created a whole like language. It's been evolving ever since. I mean, evolution in itself is also another like spontaneous order thing. But Clay had it.
I just had a comment. I just wanted to say it's interesting that you mentioned that, because how they're trying to regulate it, because apparently I've heard and read, I can't cite you any sources right now, but that the government, the military actually invented the internet. And then basically they went public with it, and now it just got so out of their hand. It became such a business machine and a communication device, an alternative news source that no one ever thought, that now they're trying to control it. But people have told me even if they tried to like shut down certain sites and like, I don't know, censor people, like it's just so vast, like they can't even, I mean, I'm sure they could maybe do something, but it's interesting how it's gone out of control.
All they can do is really like, just limited though, you know.
Right, exactly.
Infinite possibilities on the web.
Well, and I mean, part of it, a really interesting thing that I was reading about is the democratization of elections. Now it's a lot harder to just sell people crap in elections, because like, I mean, back when like LBJ was running, like you had the Daisy ad, and it's like that's literally all the information you have on the candidate, just like what they show you on TV, and you really don't know who you're voting for. And now like people have no control over like what goes on the internet about them when they're running for public office, which I think is a good thing. Because you know, if there's a problem, people know about it. And that's why it's a lot, you know, elections are so much more complicated, that's why so much money is spent on them now. And I think, you know, ultimately that it's a good thing that that information is out there if you want it. You know, which has also revolutionized the education system.
Oh, Mukun, do you have something to say?
Oh, no.
Okay, I thought that was a hand up. Sorry.
This is really small, but it says, when NASA first started sending astronauts into space, they realized that the ballpoint pen would not work at zero gravity. A $1 million investment in 2 years of tests resulted in a pen that could write in space upside down on almost any surface and at temperatures ranging from below freezing to over 300 degrees Celsius. When confronted with the same problem, the Russians used a pencil.
That's actually false. That's,
why?
Yeah, Snopes totally destroyed that myth.
Oh, okay.
But
I mean, I just thought it was like a good statement.
yeah, it does. It's a good illustration, but it doesn't actually. It's not
like historically accurate.
I have okay. So here's a.
Pens are actually better in space.
Right. Okay. So I have another example that's true that I know is true. What ship was it? It was one of the NASA ships. It's like Columbia or something. Yeah, the Columbia. So it was missing a piece of foam or some crap. What they did was they built a prototype, and then they built an exact replica of it as the official ship, and they ran out of materials, and instead of taking it from the prototype, they just sent it up into space with missing materials, and that's actually why it like collapsed.
Oh.
Yeah, and so people died because like the people working in NASA are like, you know, not necessarily amazing, but you know, and nobody really like tried to fix anything because it's not like a private company. You can't really sue them. It's just the government, and they were just like, oh, it's just a national tragedy, as opposed to something that can be fixed.
Yeah.
But
Hey Malcolm. Or I guess I should ask Michael, what part of the story is false?
I don't remember the details. I can check that for you though.
usually don't.
Like,
Well, I'm guessing the part that's not true is they spent like all that money on it. But
I mean, they may have spent that much money.
Yeah, I think
developing
the
it,
part
but
he's
it's
talking
like,
about is the fact that the Russians use pencils instead.
well, and that's still a smart thing to do.
Is it? I mean, because like pencils can break, and then you don't want that floating around
Crap
space
on
and destroying things. It's a very volatile situation.
I don't
Yeah, that is an interesting point too.
Yeah, I don't see how floating pencils can ruin anything.
Anyway, so next. And then people always ask, what about the social safety net?
Like welfare and whatnot.
Right, and this is actually like the biggest contention I have with most of my liberal friends. And then I just ask them, and like press the space bar, what is charity? Like, is it really charitable for us to take money from people at the threat of incarcerating them for their entire lives, like criminals, just because we want to spend money on bureaucracy that might give out money to people who might need it? And I mean, like, I actually used to mentor like at-risk middle school girls in Austin who lived in like really shitty areas, and one of their biggest problems was like, we reported one of the child abuse like issues. There was a girl being sexually abused, and CPS said that there were 3 reports on file, but that they couldn't do anything because there weren't 5 reports on file, and they waited that long. But then there are kids that get taken away from their parents because their parents like write something weird. Like I've heard about some in the news for kids getting taken away from their parents for the most bizarre things, but like this girl was coming to school smelling like urine. And so that's like my personal beef with you know, charitable excuses of the government.
I don't know. I mean, I think one of the major things that we're talking about charity in libertarianism is that we believe the individual does charity a lot better than the state does. You know, because we're talking about just like redistributing the like wealth, taking from some, giving to others. You know. Oh, you have something.
Go on.
Oh, okay. I mean, I was just gonna say, like, if you think about it, that's, you know, not really helping the people who are receiving the money as much as, let's say, private organizations going out and, you know, like helping them out, like actually helping them out, you know, instead of just giving them a check every month who, you know, like, I don't know. I mean, I'm just saying that, like, I've noticed, like, it's a lot more effective, you know, like, if people just uniting together do it instead of, like, you know, letting some third
Because you have to pay for the
entity, which
bureaucracy.
is the state, like, do it for you. And it's,
Right.
oh. Yeah,
Well, I just wanted to add to the discussion here.
Yeah.
I was just going to say the funny thing about it is charity is supposed to be like based on love and like caring and knowing someone. And when the state basically does this like fake charity where they steal people's money and then give it to other people and have agencies like CPS, they don't really know what they're doing when they meddle in these other people's affairs. So there was a case recently here in Texas where a mother was sitting outside in their yard and her children were playing in the street in like a nice little suburban cul-de-sac, and because of that they called like CPS on her and the police, and they threw her in jail and took away her kids, and basically now she's suing the police, and it's gotten a lot of attention on the news. But there are still like some societies with a lot of charity. Like if you look at the Amish people in like Iowa and Pennsylvania and areas like that, they do like help their neighbors, and they're like, oh, you want to erect a house? We're in on it. So if we just like look to those societies and like just love our neighbors, then we have a chance to actually have real charity. And people will say, what if there's not Social Security? Well, we have a pretty good network amongst ourselves, so alternative systems is the way to go as far as charity.
Like this is
I
the
definitely
point
agree
that
with you there. I think Jose had his hand up first, and Michael.
If you want to see, if you want to get like information, like empirical information about what welfare, what charity and mutual aid used to look like before the creation of the welfare state, I would highly recommend, after the welfare state, Students for Liberty's new free handout book, which is a compilation of essays that talks about like the welfare state and like what it's done to society, and also has some alternatives. The best is by University of Alabama history professor David Ito. He's going to be the first speaker at the Austin Students for Liberty conference as well, and he has he's like the main main person that tackles the issues of mutual aid societies and how they were actually much more effective in providing social welfare for many immigrant communities, minorities like blacks and women, and just like in general for American society before like the New Deal.
Oh yeah, I was just talking about the Amish, as you mentioned. In For New Liberty, Rothbard gushes all over, I think it was the Mormons, because their welfare programs that they had for their community.
Well, I'd like to put a soundbite in for like for-profit charities. Most of them don't last very long because society has this huge like media, like marketing ploy against them because it sounds really bad. Like they're like, oh, you're profiting off of people's losses, and would really like there's a net gain in like AIDS research. Dan Pilata had a really successful company called Pilata Teamwork. Most influential presentation I've ever seen in my entire life. And they contributed more to AIDS research in like 2 years than, what was it? Than most of the nonprofits in the entire California state or something like that. And they put on these really competitive like triathlons and things like that, and they were like, well, the 5Ks are BS because they don't challenge people, and they don't like people don't feel like they're a part of the solution. They just feel like they're kind of throwing money at something that's going to keep asking them for money, and they don't really see anything come out of it because the money just goes directly to the funding as opposed to going towards advertising for it, which increases the impact of. I mean, it's marketing, so they would end up getting way more donations because they put that money into competitive advertising and like full-page spreads in the New York Times. So they ended up getting like all their entire charity event was full within 2 hours of the New York Times being delivered. So I'm a big advocate of that.
Yeah, I mean, and he just went, oh, okay.
I mean, I'm not sure if I need to move on in this time, but I just wanted to throw in like a couple devil's advocate statements just for like food for thought. I think that, I think most of you guys know that I'm an anarchist, so I agree with everything you're saying. I think that it's much better if people actually do the work instead of having the state do it. But I think that at least one of the current problems we have is that it's, in a lot of cases, it's not considered a priority. And I mean, you could probably blame this on the state. That's why people don't think they have to do charity. But I do think that to a certain extent, you know, it's easy to say that, well, you shouldn't force people to give help, but then you're kind of weighing like, is it better to have these people get help, or is it better for me to be able to keep my money, right? And I think I agree that it's better to keep your money, and of course that you should, you know,
but I think that's a false dichotomy.
Yeah, see, I was going to say also.
Well, and I mean, that's why I'm for the for-profit charity model as opposed to necessarily like relying entirely on just people are going to help other people. Because charity is necessarily a competitive good.
Yeah, but I'm saying that like currently, because
right.
It's not, people don't generally consider it an incentive or don't consider it a moral requirement or whatever to go and help people. And I mean, I'll point to like, you know, our statistics on inequality or whatever to show that this is typically the case, that people do want to keep their money, which is fair. I'm not saying that's a bad thing.
Well, and most people don't realize that like the welfare state is systematically like entrenches people in poverty.
Yeah, and that's fair. And that's why I think it's fair to blame the state for making people think that they don't have to help, because it's like, oh, they're on welfare, well, I don't have to deal with it, right?
Yeah.
But I think that even then, you know, maybe in a situation where the state was smaller and the welfare state was more personable, that it was able to understand people's actual situations more instead of just handing out a check. In that situation, theoretically, it would make sense to instead make individuals, if they were unwilling, to help other people, right? Because that happens at the point where you decide that you value people not being in poverty more than someone's freedom to keep their money.
But that's
who gets to decide?
that's
like,
under
that's
the
problem.
assumption.
No, I understand.
I'm just saying, like, that's under the assumption that you know, like the government is making the poor people less poor by giving.
Yeah. I mean, I am making that assumption. And
Like,
I
you
think
can't be
that's a
on welfare,
reasonable
for
assumption
example,
to make
like,
when the state is small.
Well, because I know that a lot of people have been.
I mean, if the state is smaller, though, how would they get all that money to theoretically pull all those people out of
Well,
poverty?
within communities.
Right.
I'm not saying you have one overarching state pulling everyone out of poverty.
Are we talking about like voluntary
Yeah.
associations, or what are we talking about?
I would say not a voluntary association.